In 1980, Iron Maiden put out one of the most influential and important albums in heavy metal history. An album that single-handedly brought the new wave of British heavy metal crashing across two continents. In 1981, they followed that up with a sonic assault known as Killers. 2 albums with frontman PaulDi'Anno. But tonight, we're going to settle the debate. We're going to answer the age-old question. Which one's better? You get a vote, I get a vote, and together we will come up with the definitive answer. Next. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of the Metal Dude Abides. If you've been following the channel, you know that we are dedicated to going through the entire history of heavy metal from the late 60s all the way through current day, going year by year, chronicling the absolute best heavy metal had to offer, and offering up awards that the Grammys should have given. And so we're in the year 1981, and today we're going to talk about the best musical performances from that year. We're going to talk about the best drummers. We're going to talk about the best guitarists. We're going to talk about the best bass players and give out awards at the end of the show. But before that, one of the things that I found odd as I was going through the year 1981 is how similar it is to 1980. Now, if you were around the last few episodes, we talked about how I believe 1980 might have been the greatest year in the history of hard rock and heavy metal. But 1981 is just 1 year away from that epicenter, and it has some striking resemblances to the previous year. Many bands and artists put out 2 albums in 80 and 81 that are remarkably similar. Let me give you a couple of examples. We just got through talking about Ozzy Osbourne, right? Ozzy put out 2 albums with Randy Rhoads. Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman. Unfortunately, after that, we lost Randy Rhoads, so those 2 albums, very similar, kind of have a chapter of Ozzy's career. The band he left, Black Sabbath, they put out 2 albums with singer Ronnie James Dio. Now, yes, Ronnie James Dio came back about a decade later for Dehumanizer, but at the time, there were 2 albums with Ronnie James Dio as the singer, Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. Van Halen, for all of their popularity and greatness, they put out 2 very similar albums in that they put out the 2 heaviest albums in their careers, very similar albums in Women and Children First and Fair Warning. But today, we're going to talk about Iron Maiden because they also have an interesting chapter here, because in 1980 and 1981, they put out self-titled Iron Maiden album and Killers. Both of these albums are fronted by singer PaulDi'Anno, who then left the band and was replaced by Bruce Dickinson. So once again, this is its own distinct chapter in Maiden history. And tonight, we're going to try to figure out which one is the best. And you may be asking yourself, where'd you get the idea for this? Well, let me just say, one of my favorite shows of all time was a show called That Metal Show. It was on VH1. It was hosted by Eddie Trunk, Don Jameson, and Jim Florentine. And every episode, they would start the episode out with a top 5 list. It was always one of the best segments. I would just sit there, and I love lists. That's why I do this channel, right? And at the end of this program, at the end of this episode, we're going to talk about the top 5 guitarists. You know, I love that concept. But at the end of the show, they would do an album throwdown, and they would take 2 great albums and put them head to head and decide which one's the best. So we're going to steal from those geniuses and do a little segment right now where we take a look track by track at Iron Maiden and Killers and determine which one of these is the best. But here's where you come into the show. It's not just about my opinion. I'm going to sit here and give you my opinion. So you have 2 choices. Number 1, you can vote before you hear my opinion. If you have an idea of which one you think's better, go down to the comments, put in either Iron Maiden or Killers. And while you're down there, put a thumbs up there, right? Subscribe to the channel. Or if you want to wait to hear what my opinion is and see if it sways your opinion, you can always vote at the end of the show as well. Same thing, go down to the comments below and put in your selection for which one's better, Iron Maiden or Killers. But in the meantime, let me tell you what I think of these two albums. Before we go track by track through these albums, I want to lay some ground rules. Number one, we're going to use a 10-point scoring system. So each of these songs has a possibility of getting anywhere from 10 to 0 points. They're going to go head to head. Now, it's kind of like boxing, right? We're not going to have any ties. So there won't be any 5-5s. So if the two songs are really close, I have to make a decision. One will get 6 points, one will get 4. And if it's a knockout, all 10 votes will go for the other song. Also, we're also going to talk about occasionally throwing in a bonus point just for something that I find, worthy of getting a little extra oomph. But before we get to the track-to-track listing, I want to give out a couple of those bonus points right now. Because we've talked about how these two albums are similar, but there are two major differences between these two albums, and both of those differences are in the favor of Killers. Killers is the first Iron Maiden album produced by you-know-who, Martin Birch. He has produced every Iron Maiden album since and has really been a prominent person in the success of Iron Maiden. He really knows how to bring out the sonic assault known as Iron Maiden. So I'm going to start us off right off the bat. 5 bonus points to Killers for bringing on Martin Birch. The second difference between these two albums also goes to Killers because they just brought in guitarist Adrian Smith, one of my favorite guitarists in the entirety of Iron Maiden. So I'm going to give him another 2 bonus points for bringing in Adrian Smith. So right off the bat, Killers get started with a 7-zip lead. Now let's go track by track. Now our first battle is with the 2 opening tracks of the albums. In Iron Maiden, you have the song Prowler. This is a very influential song. This is a very important song because this song, it always to me symbolizes the beginning of Iron Maiden, the absolute explosion of the new wave of British heavy metal. Because this song in particular was on an EP that was cut a year earlier, the infamous Soundhouse tapes that Iron Maiden had distributed around England and was being played in clubs. Hordes of young men were showing up to the clubs with air guitar contests, and most of it was generated by those very songs on the Soundhouse tapes. This was the first song on the Soundhouse tapes, and it opens up Iron Maiden. Now, on the album Killers, you have a combo pack, the Ides of March and Wrathchild. Oh my. We talked about Martin Birch. Boy, the production, you just hear the difference immediately. Steve Harris puts on one of the all-time great bass lines in this one. Really, between the production and Steve Harris's bass on this song, it's just like this is a whole new different sounding band. For that reason, I am going to give 7 points to Ides of March and Wrathchild, 3 points to Prowler, because again, it is a very good song and a very important song. So 7-3, Killers. Track 2 on Iron Maiden is the epic Remember Tomorrow. If you were here for our episodes in 1980, you know this is my favorite PaulDi'Anno vocal performance. It has several dramatic crescendos in it. I love this song. I actually heard the song. They did a live EP called Made in Japan. If you want to see the absolute most epic performance of this, go find Made in Japan. They also put out a video, very hard to find, but it's out there, where they do this song live. The lighting, PaulDi'Anno, the whole works. What a great song. One of my all-time favorites from this era. But it's going up against a good one as well. Murders in the Rue Morgue. Again, I am going to be a broken record on this episode because I'm going to mention Clive Burr a lot. Clive Burr is one of the greatest drummers of all time. He was great on the first album, but again, with this new production and really bringing the drums and the bass up in the mix, you really start to be able to hear Clive better, understand and appreciate him better. And it's, song after song after song, Clive Burr is killing it. But at the end of the day, I love Remember Tomorrow so much that I have to give Remember Tomorrow 8 points, 2 for Murders in the Rue Morgue. However, we're always starting to fudge the numbers a little bit. I'm going to give a bonus point for any song that references the great Edgar Allan Poe. So this one ends up 8 for Iron Maiden and 3 for Killers. Track 3 on Iron Maiden, the iconic Running Free. I talked about how Prowler to me is always going to be that very initial Iron Maiden song, but actually they put out a single. This was actually the first single they put out. And a little known trivia, on the cover of that single is the first appearance of this guy, Eddie. But very interestingly, you can't see Eddie's face yet. They're saving that for the album. So you get to see Eddie, but you don't see all of Eddie. Kind of like a teaser for like Jaws or a Godzilla movie where it's going to be great, but they're going to make you wait a little bit for until you buy your ticket. But it is going up against a very good deep track on this album on Killers, Another Life. Once again, we've talked about PaulDi'Anno, we've talked about Steve Harris, we've talked about Clive Burr, but this is back to bonus points for Dave Murray and Adrian Smith playing together is just something beautiful to behold. I said earlier that I think Adrian Smith is my favorite Maiden guitarist. Let me rephrase that a little bit. Adrian Smith and Dave Murray playing together is my favorite duo in all of Iron Maiden history. They play off each other excellent. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about it in Judas Priest, how K.K. Downing and Glenn Tipton, the sum of those two makes an amazing sound. Adrian Smith, Dave Murray, this song, you really start to see that combination working together, and it is gorgeous. And for that reason, upset alert, I'm going to go with Another Life with 6 points and the iconic Running Free with 4. All right, if you watch my channel, you know that from time to time I bend the rules just a little bit. It's my channel after all, and I don't mind bending them to my benefit. And so I'm going to bend them a little bit here because I'm going to change the track listings just a tad, and I'm going to move up on Iron Maiden into the track 4 spot, Transylvania, to go up against, on the Killers album, Genghis Khan. And the reason I'm doing that is because these are the 2 instrumental songs on both albums. So it seems like a better comparison than trying to put a song against an instrumental. And these 2 instrumentals are great. I want to call out especially, broken record alert, the drumming Clive Burr puts on Genghis Khan. He is doing some amazing things on the drums in this. I'm not sure it's as melodic as Transylvania, but instrumentally, it blows Transylvania away. However, as much as I like tremendous instrumentation, man, Transylvania, boy, it just gets you doing that. It's such a great melodic instrumental. So slight edge, going back to the original Iron Maiden and Transylvania, who's going to squeak past Genghis Khan 6-4. Now, since we switched those up, coming in the 5th slot now is off Iron Maiden, Phantom of the Opera, and off Killers is Innocent Exile. Poor Innocent Exile drew the monster that is Phantom of the Opera. I love Phantom of the Opera. This is really kind of the song that got me into Iron Maiden, the PaulDi'Anno era. I heard this the first time. I was like, this is so good. It is a monster. It's got just such great instrumentals. You have to say, it is an epic song. And it actually got nominated for a Grammy not too long ago, but not the Iron Maiden version of it, the Ghost version of it. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Last year's Grammy Awards, Ghost got a nomination for this very song, Phantom of the Opera. So if you are a fan of Iron Maiden and have never heard the Ghost version, or if you're a fan of Ghost and never seen the Iron Maiden version, go check them out. They're both excellent. I would say the Iron Maiden one is much more raw. Back to, again, they were really raw production back then, whereas Ghost smooths out a little bit of those angles, but doesn't have quite as much power as Iron Maiden. So they're both very different, but obviously very similar. Poor Innocent Exile. It's a great song, another deep track. The first 2 minutes of the song is just watching Steve Harris do amazing Steve Harris things. Then there's a PaulDi'Anno scream, and then the rest of the band kicks in, and it really rollicks towards the end of it. Really good deep track, but you drew the short straw when I switched those two instrumentals up, my friend, and we have our first knockout. Phantom of the Opera, 10. Innocent Exile, 0. All right, we're back in sync for track 6 of Iron Maiden, Strange World. And off Killers, we have the title track, Killers. Now, Strange World's an interesting story. I heard this a while back, but when I went to go do research for this and cite some sources, I couldn't find it again, so take it with a grain of salt. But I heard somewhere that Steve Harris really didn't care for this song, and it was one of the kind of splitting points with the original guitarist, Dennis Stratton, where he was like, this is kind of Dennis's thing. I want to move in a different direction. Dennis wanted to be more in this realm. And so I don't know if that, like I said, I went back to find that, source and I couldn't, but it seems like this was a bone of contention on the first album. But having said that, if that was the case, I have to, humble little old me, have to disagree with Steve Harris. This is a great song. I really like it, and I really think it has a nice moody change to it. The first Iron Maiden album is really kind of a breakneck speed. Every song is pretty fast, pretty heavy. The two kind of breaks in that, Remember Tomorrow, which is excellent, and this one right here, Strange World. So I think I care and like this song much more than the band happened to. But similar to Phantom of the Opera, they go up against Killers. This may be my favorite guitar song on the entire album. Again, Dave Murray is just killing it on this. Really some good effects with that. Adrian Smith, always good. And I really like PaulDi'Anno's voice on this song. We talked about this before. It's probably universally noted that Bruce Dickinson is one of the greatest singers of all time. And so Paul probably doesn't quite fit into the greatest singer of all time category with Iron Maiden. But he does some really good, he's underestimated, and he does a lot of great things with his voice. And in this song in particular, Paul really projects a very menacing presence, really tells the story well. So it's pretty much a wipeout. Because I love Strange World, I'm going to give him 1 point. But Killers gets 9. All right, you got to watch me constantly because I'm going to cheat a little bit again. So way back when these albums first came out, most of the time, people may not realize this, but when I first got into heavy metal, there was no internet. Think about that. You young kids are like, how did you live in a world without the internet? So you would go to the record store and you'd flip through albums, and a lot of times you would buy albums just based on the cover, which is why I think Iron Maiden took off so well. If you look at that first cover of Iron Maiden, you're like, this has got to be good, right? So off I went home with it. And one of the things, and I loved it, but then later on when I purchased this on CD, I noticed there was a little bit of a difference. And it, again, took me years to figure out why that difference was. But if you go all the way back to 1980, when Iron Maiden released this in North America, there was a song on there called Sanctuary. And I absolutely loved that song. And I was really bummed when it wasn't on the CD. Now, there's a couple of interesting stories with this. Number one, Sanctuary, I think, was written by a guitarist that was no longer in the band. And so probably the reason they got rid of it was not because it wasn't a good song, but because there was probably a hassle with royalties or whatever the case may be. I have never seen anywhere why they took it off from the and only had it on the North American release. I don't know. That's just speculation. Number two, they also released this as a single when they put out the first album, and had a very controversial cover on that single where Eddie is standing over a very injured, if not dead, Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher. So there was a very controversial piece to this song as well. But I'm including it because, number one, it's one of my favorite tracks. Number two, this is how I originally listened to this album. And number three, it evens up the track, so it's very self-serving. Now, on the flip side of that, Killers has a song called Prodigal Son. And I will say right now, on these two albums, there are no bad songs. These are two albums that just have great songs scattered throughout them, except one. I do not care for Prodigal Son. And it may just be me. Obviously, the singing doesn't sound like this, but the music of it sounds like Rush. It's like Iron Maiden went up to Canada and said, hey, let's put a Rush song together. And I don't care for it. I don't think it's a song that PaulDi'Anno can sing all that well. The music, like I said, it's very light. I like Rush. Please hold your fire. I like Rush, but I will say I do not like Rush nearly like I love Iron Maiden. Two very different bands. If I'm on a desert island disc and they say you can have all the Rush albums or all the Maiden albums, I don't even have to think about it. It's going to be Maiden. So I would rather Maiden sound like Maiden and Rush sound like Rush. This song just sounds like they were just kind of experimenting with some things, and I don't like it. So not only am I bringing on a song that isn't on most of the albums, I'm going to give it 10 whole points where poor old Prodigal Son's going to get the goose. 10-0 for Maiden. As we get to track 8, the competition between these two songs is amongst the tightest of any battles we've had yet. On one side, we have on Iron Maiden, Charlotte the Harlot, the first of 4 songs to feature the infamous Miss Charlotte, the prostitute so close to Iron Maiden's heart. And on the Killer side, we have the song Purgatory. Now, both of these songs are excellent, and what's interesting about it is with Purgatory, it's very similar to Charlotte the Harlot in that it sounds more like it should belong on the first album. These are two very fast songs, excellent songs. Now, this has nothing to do with the music itself, but I do have a funny story. Purgatory, by the way, is my favorite Eddie. I don't know if you've ever seen the picture. It's half Eddie, half devil. I always thought that was really excellent Eddie. And oh, by the way, if you have a favorite Eddie, put it down in the comments below. The reason I bring it up, I do have a funny personal story about this. I had a coworker come up to me one day and say, hey, I hear you're going to an Iron Maiden concert. And I said, yeah, we're going to go see him, blah, blah, blah. And she said, could you do me a favor? My daughter would really like an Iron Maiden t-shirt. I said, sure, I'm glad to spread the metal joy. So I go to the concert and I find, to me, ooh, there's a Purgatory shirt. My favorite Eddie. Went and bought the shirt, gave it to my coworker. My coworker took one look at it and she goes, what is this? I said, oh, this is an Iron Maiden t-shirt. She goes, yes, but it's so scary. And whatnot. To make a long story short, it scared her daughter. Wouldn't wear it. I kind of felt bad, but, what are you going to do? I'm not good at picking out, apparently, Iron Maiden shirts for small children. So keep that in mind if you ever have me purchase something for you at a concert. Anyway, back to the competition. Both really good songs, both really fast songs. I love PaulDi'Anno's voice, especially in Purgatory. So I'm going to give it to Purgatory, 6-4, but I am going to give a bonus point for good old Charlotte. 6-5 on this one. Finally, both albums go off on a real high note. Truth be told, these two final songs, if they were going up against anybody else, would be really dominant, but unfortunately they go up against each other. From the Iron Maiden side of the house, we have their title track, the song that they're named for, Iron Maiden. And over on the Killer side, we have the song Drifter. Both of these have tremendous opening riffs. That opening riff on Iron Maiden is just iconic. I've heard it so many times over the years. Both are excellent ways to finish the albums, excellent closing tracks. But again, I'm going to go in a different direction. I'm going to lean towards the non-classic. I think most people are probably aware of Iron Maiden, but I'm going to give it to Drifter once again in a very tight category, 6-4. But I am, once again, going to give a bonus point to the song Iron Maiden because this is Eddie's song. If you've ever seen Iron Maiden in concert, you know they play Iron Maiden. Out comes Eddie in all of his different versions. Always a highlight of a show. Next time Iron Maiden's in your neck of the woods, go see him. So let's see if my math is right, and it usually isn't. I have this one as 52-48 for the original Iron Maiden. But interestingly enough, even though this was a close one, I also kind of cheated a little bit and included the song Sanctuary, even though it was only available for a few select albums. If you take Sanctuary off of these two, it completely flips over to Killers. That's how razor tight the competition between these two albums are. So, once again, vote. Let me hear from you which of these songs you think, which of these albums you think is the absolute best, because it can go either way. But speaking of great musical numbers, let's not lose track of why we came here. Let's talk about the best drummers. Let's talk about the best bass. And let's talk about the best guitars next. Our first nominee, Black Sabbath, with a combo song E5150 and The Mob Rules. You may have heard The Mob Rules. It is one of the more played songs off this era of Black Sabbath. But unless you have the album Mob Rules, you've never probably heard the combo of E5150 and The Mob Rules. E5150 is really a creepy, heavy intro, musical interlude that comes into it. Very dark. It kind of reminds me a little bit, going back to the Rainbow days of Gates of Babylon, where they have that real creepy intro before they break into the song. This is two separate tracks, a little bit different than Gates of Babylon, obviously, but same kind of concept. Really creepy, heavy, doomy, atmospheric type of intro. And then Tony Iommi kicks in with one of the faster, heavier riffs in the entirety of the Sabbath catalog. Love it. E5150 and The Mob Rules. Our second nominee, Watch the Attack of the Mad Axe Man, Michael Schenker. You knew he was going to be on the list. Michael Schenker just putting out killer riff after killer riff during these days. This is maybe my favorite guitar song from Michael Schenker of his solo career. Like, I love the stuff with the Scorpions. I love the stuff with UFO. And these first few solo albums are great. This may be my favorite Michael Schenker solo song of all time. Check out Mad Axe Man, our second nominee. Our third nominee, well, surprise, surprise, Ozzy Osbourne and the legendary Randy Rhoads with the song Over the Mountain. Just like with Blizzard, I can pick just about any song off this album, and it's going to have legendary guitar work written all over it. So take your pick. Over the Mountain, the title track Diary of a Madman, you name it. Randy Rhoads is playing some of the greatest guitar in the history of heavy metal. I picked this one because I just love that opening galloping riff. What a way to start off an album. Over the Mountain, Ozzy Osbourne. Now, our fourth nominee is another person who tends to be on this list quite a bit, Ted Nugent, with the song Heads Will Roll off his Intensities in 10 Cities live album. Now, make no mistake, Intensities in 10 Cities is no double live gonzo. The production of it's a little murky. I don't think the song quality is near as good as what you saw just a couple of years ago with Ted Nugent in his heyday. However, what this album does have is monster guitar playing at its best. Because here, Ted Nugent says, I'm not going to necessarily worry that much about the songs. I'm just going to get out in front of a live audience and jam and just take all that crowd and take all my energy and just make it explode. So lots of energy, lots of great guitar. In fact, Guitar World named this one of the top 10 live guitar albums of all time. High praise indeed. And this song, Heads Will Roll, has maybe my favorite solo in the entirety of the album. Our fourth nominee, Ted Nugent, Heads Will Roll. And finally, one of the most unheralded guitarists in the history of heavy metal, from one of the most unheralded bands in the history of metal, Riot, with their song Outlaw. Now, Riot is a band that many people have never heard of, and Mark Reale is a guitarist many people have never heard of. Do yourselves a favor. Familiarize yourself with both those names. This album, Fire Down Under, and this guitarist, Mark Reale, unbelievable stuff, people. Mark Reale is a great guitarist. The solo in particular on this song, just to depict what's happening in the song, this Mexican bandito has gotten off with some loot, and he's headed for the border, and there's a posse chasing him down, and there's a scene at the end of this where he's clearly has stopped, and he's celebrating his victory, and he is clearly drunk on tequila, not knowing, of course, that the posse is just hot on his heels. One of the most, and Mark's just shredding in the background, just absolutely shredding, much like the Randy Rhoads. I almost went with Ultra the King on this one, which has a really cool guitar intro in it, but man, I can't get away from this solo. Our fifth nominee, Outlaw by Riot. And the winner is I probably end up saying this almost every week. There's always these competitions that are just so incredibly tight. How can I not choose every one of these songs? I mean, on one hand, you've got Randy Rhoads, one of my favorite guitarists of all time. We only have him for 2 albums, people, and these 2 albums are absolute masterpieces. You heard, I confessed, this is my favorite Michael Schenker song as a solo artist. One of the all-time great solos that he puts together. You've got the riff master himself, Tony Iommi, putting one of the heaviest, fastest riffs in the history of Black Sabbath. What to do, what a dilemma. Well, when I get into this dilemma, what I end up doing is maybe picking the song I like the best of the bunch, the song that I probably still to this day listen to the most. And as I go there, we're going to have a bit of an upset, because the winner is Riot with Outlaw. I still listen to that song. That album is so classic. We're going to talk about it here in a bit, but it is one of the all-time classics, and I still listen to it to this day, well over 40 years later. It has aged beautifully. Mark Reale's guitar playing across this entire album is absolutely jaw-dropping. It is tight. If you wanted to go in a different direction, I wouldn't argue. But at the end of the day, I'm going to give it to Riot. Really tough competition. Now, we've just told you who the best guitarist was. We've given you the best drummer. We've given you the best bass. But at the end of the day, I haven't given you who's going to win the Grammy for Best Instrumental Performance. But since the bass player and the drummer come from the same album, that's where we're going to go. Best Instrumental Performance of 1981 goes to Iron Maiden for the album Killers, between Clive Burr, between Steve Harris, and let's not at all, discount the guitar work of Dave Murray and Adrian Smith. All of that goes into a big win for Iron Maiden, one of the greatest accomplishments musically in their entire collection. Congratulations. Now, the Grammys that year went with The Police, with the very interesting Behind My Camel. It's kind of a mesmerizing little tune, to tell you the truth. I like The Police. I listened to The Police. They were a pretty big band when I was growing up. Always thought they were pretty good. But I have to admit, I never liked them as much as the critics liked them. This is the second year in a row that the Police have brought home the award for Best Musical Performance. And I have to kind of shake my head to say, are they that good? I mean, they are. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think all 5 of the guitar songs that we just put on the list is better. I obviously think the album from Iron Maiden is better. And I'll throw another one in there that came this close to getting a nomination. Richie Blackmore just had a musical performance called Difficult to Cure, where he covers Beethoven. That's also pretty good. I would take all of those over The Police. And it's not because I think The Police are terrible or that I don't think they're music geniuses. But it's like, again, I look at the Grammys and I'm like, yeah, The Police are doing some interesting things. Have you heard these bands? Have you heard Randy Rhoads? Have you heard Black Sabbath? The greatest instrument guitarists, drummers, they tend to gravitate towards music like this, and yet they never even get a sniff. Now, an interesting side note, the Grammys that year do nominate Rush. And I have to admit, a great choice by the Grammy. Many people think that this song in particular is Neil Peart's finest moment. And when you start talking about Neil Peart, even if it's in amongst his top performances, you know you're going to get a real show. And Geddy Lee's bass on this is very underrated. Alex Lifeson's guitar, very underrated. Moving Pictures, a very good album for Rush. All of those, I think, beat The Police, who are good, but they're not that good. So again, not only am I going to give the heavy metal instrumental of the year to Iron Maiden Killers, I'm going to do it across the board. Iron Maiden Killers, the best instrumental of the year in 1981. And that's our show. Now, this is a time where I tell you that we're going through the entirety of 1981 over the next few years. Next week, we're going to be talking about vocal performances. You don't want to miss any episodes. So, once again, go down below. Vote for your favorite Iron Maiden album. And if you want, vote for your favorite instrumental album. Even if you like The Police, put it in there. We'll see how people do. We'll see how people vote. And while you're in there logging your choices, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Give it a thumbs up. Get alerts so that you're ready for when we're going to do best vocalists, best hard rock categories, best heavy metal categories. All of that is yet to come through 1981. But in the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.